And this is a place called the Pine Thicket. Bud got nervous having them there, so he said, "You can't stay here." So he contacted a guy by the name of Thomas Jones, who was a smuggler for the South. They took him to a place called the Pine Thicket, basically bog and swamp, and they hid out there for 5 days. No food or water or any comforts. Jones borrowed food once in a while. They arranged for a boat at the Potomac River so they could row across the river and get into Maryland, all the way to Maryland. Interestingly, like a lot of plots, a lot of things, they got in the boat, Booth in the back because he got a bad leg. The other guy, Harold, rowing. And they rowed for 2 hours. The river was about 2 miles wide at that point, the Potomac River, in the middle of the night. Current and winds trucking along, and they ended up 4 miles down the river on the same side of the river. So this Jones guy had to back again and get the boat arranged, and finally they got across. The other thing during that period of time, 2 things. Jones kept bringing in papers so the Booth could read about the events in Washington, D.C., and he was furious because he was a cutthroat thief and murderer. He wasn't a hero, surprisingly. And I said he had a diary, and he wrote a lot in his diary when he was hiding out in the thicket. And this is one of the things he wrote in his diary. "I struck boldly. I could never repent. Though we hated to kill, our country owed all the trouble to him." That diary was taken after he was shot and captured, given to by Edmund Stanton in the 6-year war, who didn't for 2 years, even though they had investigations and trials and so on. In the meantime, some of the other guys, like George Asselrod, who got drunk and roamed around drinking all over Washington, ended up at a place 20 miles away north of D.C., bragging about the murder, naming names. Guess what? People he talked to called the authorities and he got arrested. Lewis Powell Payne, who was a great big hulking ex-soldier, unbelievably, he showed up at Mary Surratt's house. Unfortunately, when he showed up, the soldiers were there to arrest Mary Surratt. And he said, "Well, I'm just here to dig a ditch." He had a pickaxe in his hand. "I'm here, she wanted me to dig a ditch," but he had blood all over his arms from attacking Sue. So, of course, he got arrested immediately. Then the troops searched Dr. Mudd's house. They arrested him. At that same time, by this time, Abraham Lincoln's funeral had been completed. He was on a train to Springfield for burial. At Garrett's barn, about the 26th of April, the troops had found, gotten a lead and found out that that's maybe where the fugitives were hiding. So they went to Garrett's barn, Garrett's farm. The Garretts were afraid of these 2 guys, so they told them to sleep in the barn. They locked the barn, and then they sat outside guarding it because they were afraid they were thieves. The troops came and surrounded the barn. David Harold was there, and he surrendered. And Booth called him a coward and all his other names, and he did surrender to the troops. But this time they had set fire to the barn, and it was burning. We have a picture of the Boston Corporate, I think. That's Lafayette Baker, the guy that was hired from New York to track these guys down. Next slide. Okay, Lafayette Baker, as soon as he came to Washington, this is one of the first things he did. Here's the rewards that he had offered for the capture of these guys. $100,000 for the jury, $50,000 for the other information, so on and so forth. And most of those rewards were paid. In the meantime, Booth is alone in the barn's burning, on taking him alive, but all of a sudden a shot rang out. Boston Corporal, sergeant in the U.S. Army, shot at Booth and hit him in the neck and hit his spinal cord and paralyzed him. Against all orders. They dragged Booth out of the barn, put him out in the porch, and he lived a little while and then he died. Boston Corbett never was tried, never was discharged, nothing ever happened to him. Even when violated over. He ended up dying in a forest fire in Minnesota. After they got Booth, and he died on the Garrett's porch, they took him back to Washington in an old garbage wagon. He was dead. They had an autopsy to prove that, establish it was him, with some surgical marks and dental records. But the military wrapped him up in a blanket or an old sack or carpet and put him in a boat, rowed out the Potomac River, and dumped it in the river. It was fake. They had Booth down the bottom of the boat, and they rowed up around the corner on the side of Old Republic and buried him in a hole at the old penitentiary that nobody knew about. And that was a secret burial that nobody knew about. They all thought he'd been dumped in the river. Now we get to the trial. May 9th, not even a couple weeks later, the trial started for 8 of the conspirators. It was a military trial rather than a civil trial, which to this day nobody's explained why that happened. But it was Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. There were 366 witnesses, 4,900 pages of transcripts. The trial took 7 weeks. The verdict, it started on May 9, verdict was on July 5. On July 6th, the judge entered an order that these 4 of the people would be sent to life imprisonment. 4 were to be hanged. Those 4 were to be hanged were Mary Surratt, David Harold, Louis Payne, and George Askew. And they were to be hanged the next day. A waiting period, no appeals, no nothing. The next day. Hastily put up a gallows in the courtyard of the military facility and ready to hang them. I'm sorry, this is the room where William died. Virtual room. They carried him across the street from Ford's Theater to Peterson House. This was a lieutenant's room who was out for the night. Carried him and laid him on that bed. He was so long and tall, they had to lay him sideways. And his feet were at that end, and the head at this end. But he was at an angle because he was so large. There are pictures and photographs of, or at least drawings of this room showing about 18 or 20 people in there. But it's impossible because it's only about 10 feet wide and 18 feet long. So the most people could be in one room is about 10 feet at most, including Mary Lincoln, Robert Lincoln, and the Secretary of War. Okay, next. Okay, this is, I want you to mark that over. Okay, hold it. You see this right here? This is a picture of the gallows. They got the 4 people in hoods up there sitting in chairs. That's an umbrella. It was very, very hot, like 100 degrees. Mary Surratt had a hood over her head, one black dress. The umbrella was up there to keep her from the sun from hitting her. Not a lot of irony. She's about to be hanged in about 3 minutes. They're all good. Next slide. There they are. All 4 of them. As far as I know, I'm not certain about this, as far as I know, Mary Surratt was the only woman in the U.S. government ever hung. And Rosenberg, they electrocuted them, but I think this is the only woman that ever hung. The other thing is that the graves were right below where they were hanging. Like 4 holes and dropped them in the holes and buried them. Took the scaffold down and covered it up. That's where they were. Interestingly,
their clothes are all kind of tied together, is that why? So
they tied their hands behind them, they tied their legs together. They mainly did that so they wouldn't kick and thrash around. They all had hoods on. In fact, I think they all had hoods on all the time they were in prison. several years. And then these hoods put on and escorted to the gallows. What's interesting to me, John Surratt, Mary's son, who was a real sneaky kind of guy, a Confederate spy, went to Canada a lot. He escaped, he took off as soon as this happened, went to Canada, then went to Europe. It was 2 years before they found him. I'm surprised they kept looking for him. Brought him back, put him on trial in a civil court, either a hung jury or couldn't decide, so he never got convicted, and then nothing ever happened. It just people lost interest, which is interesting. He was one of the main conspirators of the war. Parker, the guy that was supposed to be guarding Lincoln in the theater at the door, he never got charged for anything. He did get finally fired from the police department. Austin Corbett, who shot Booth, nothing ever happened to him. In 1869, police from Edwin Booth and other family members, which astounds me, authorized everybody to remove the bodies. And they went and told Edwin Booth where John Wilkes was and that whole penitentiary. Anyway, Andrew Johnson allowed them to dig up the bodies and take them home for burial. So they were buried in family plots. Dr. Mudd and others were sent to life in prison, Fort Jefferson and the Joy Tortugas, west of Key West, Florida. Interesting, there's lots of books like this one, Conspiracies. 2010, they dug up John Wilkes Booth because somebody complained it wasn't really him. He's in Mexico. He lived in Mexico and escaped. So they had to take him up to check DNA in 2010. Imagine that. Lincoln's casket was almost stolen. It was put in a small mausoleum in Springfield while they're building the Lincoln Memorial Lincoln big monument. Someone tried to steal it, they caught him, so they buried it under the floor, under a bunch of wooden planks, and it was laid there for 2 years. Lincoln's casket. Then they finally took him out and buried him where he is now, actually in 10 feet of concrete at the Lincoln Monument. His casket was opened in the 1930s to verify that it was Lincoln. And I have an article that somebody sent me from one of the papers back then. Some kids, including a kid, got to look in there and look at his face and make sure it was him. Okay, let's do the last one. That's what he looked like before he died. But I thought of some things when I was doing this. So what ifs? What if he hadn't gone to the theater? What if Grant had gone with him? What if the guard had stayed at the door? What if Robert had gone along? He was too tired, he went to bed. What if Ward Hill Lamont, his bodyguard, had gone with him? Would this have not happened? What if the gun had misfired? What if they had successfully killed Henry Johnson? What if they killed William Seward? That's the line of succession in the government. Who's next? I don't know. Washington newspapers is one reason Booth got upset. They called him a scoundrel, a coward, and the ultimate villain, which really upset him. Called him a cutthroat, a hireling, a thug, a fool, a weak tool of the Confederate States of America. And I want to conclude with a quote, an unusual quote. And this comes from the Richmond, Virginia paper, the South, capital of the Confederacy. This is the most deplorable calamity which has ever befallen the people of the U.S. That's the Southerners talking. And I think that killing has had a lasting effect in this country to this day. So thanks for listening. The troublemaker there back there wants to ask a question.
I've always had an interest in Lincoln as well. We've been to Ford's Theater in Springfield. And you're right, what I ought to have read, Mary Surratt was the first woman and only woman to be hanged. Secondly, have you ever seen an article written about the similarities of Kennedy and Lincoln? Like seated on Friday, they're both killed on a Friday, seated next to their wives. Oswald shot from a warehouse, got caught in the theater. Booth was theater to a warehouse. And one more, Dr. Mudd. If you ever heard the expression, if you do that, you're going to be mud.
Your name's Mudd.
Your name's Mudd. That goes back to Dr. Mudd that was treated.
Roger Mudd used to be a television newscaster, was a relative. And like in the 60s or 70s, he got a pardon from, I think, the presidential pardon. Because he was somewhat innocent, although they said you cut the guy's boot off and he claimed you didn't know who he was, but there in his boot, stenciled inside, it says John Wilkes Booth. You cut it off and broke away. Another similarity to Kennedy, Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy.
One more. Both wives spoke French. I thought that's kind of far-fetched. I thought Mrs. Kennedy did that one.
Chuck.
Jed, thank you.